Well, South Koreans are preparing to head to the polls after acting President Han Duck-soo announced a snap election on the 3rd of June. This comes after the Constitutional Court unanimously voted to oust President Yoon Suk Yeol from office after he imposed martial law last year. Robert Kelly is a professor of political science and diplomacy at Pusan National University, and he joins me now. Robert, great to have you on the program once again. Now, the polls are pointing, towards a win for the opposition Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung. Is that all but certain from where you're sitting?
Yeah, I think so. I suppose it's possible that the conservatives will pull it out, but I mean, it's always possible. Lee Jae-myung isn't as far ahead in the polling as I think many people expected. His margins against various competitors around 7 to 10%, which looks pretty solid, but it could erode, and there's still, I don't know, about 20, 25% undecided voters. But Lee Jae-myung did come in second place in the previous presidential election of 2022. He only lost by less than 1%, and so he's widely considered both the frontrunner for the left and also the frontrunner to win.
Yes, and as far as this election is concerned, has the impeached former leader Yoon Suk Yeol effectively eliminated the chances of any of his People's Power Party candidates from winning this election?
I think as long as Lee Jae-myung is careful and quiet in what he says and doesn't sort of rock the boat, again, yeah, he should win. In 2002, the only reason he lost, actually, in 2022, pardon me, was because there was a factional left-wing candidate who pulled away 3% from him. If that person hadn't run to his left, those votes almost certainly would have gone to him, and he would have won. So again, as long as he sort of runs a sort of bland, sort of typical campaign, doesn't say anything outlandish, he should bring those voters home, and he should walk away with a good 52 or 53%. That said, Lee Jae-myung does kind of have a history of saying things that get him in some hot water, but as long as he can keep his mouth shut for a month or two, he should win.
Yes, and who are in the running for the Conservatives to run? I believe that's more than one candidate in the running.
Yeah, right now it's I believe it's 3 or 4. I believe I haven't actually sort of checked. It's all kind of in flow. I believe it's a couple people from the parliament. One previous candidate from, I want to say, 7 years ago, and I believe a mayor. The way it works, candidate recruitment in Korea often works through mayoralties, right? Previous mayors of the largest cities, which means particularly Seoul, are often candidates, but none of them really have the kind of profile that Lee Jae-myung has, and all of them are sort of overshadowed by, Yoon's removal. And so, again, I think unless they can really distinguish themselves from him, which seems unlikely in just 2 months, I think they're all in a lot of trouble.
Yes, and do you think, but on the other hand, that South Korean voters will factor in the fact that Lee Jae-myung's Democratic Party does have a clear majority in the national parliament, hence there would be a concentration of power towards the one party should Lee win?
Yeah, I would actually argue that actually might work in their favor, because one of the reasons why Yoon Suk Yeol declared martial law, if you read his martial law statement from December 3rd, was he actually argued it was because of divided government. His argument was that the opposition controlled the legislature and it was making it impossible for him to govern. There's actually some truth to that, by the way. The opposition really was, I would argue, excessively obstructionist. I think Yoon wildly overreacted to that, but I think the concern of divided government, of the legislature and the executive being in different hands and the country basically being ungovernable, I think that was correct. That's actually a reason I would argue to vote for Lee Jae-myung, which is that you might actually have, organized partisan government from one side or the other and could actually do what they want to do, which would then allow the conservatives, presumably in the next election, to run coherently against what had happened.
Yes, and what is it that they want to do if Lee becomes president? What might be on the top of his and his party's legislative agenda? Probably
détente with North Korea. South Korea is pretty polarized, and the single biggest issue here is between right and left is the approach towards North Korea. The South Korean right, as you might imagine, is pretty anti-communist. I would argue almost sort of paranoid about North Korea's influence in South Korea, whereas the South Korean left very much wants to pursue détente. The term here in Korean is the sunshine policy. There have been 3 previous liberal presidents which have done this. That's not really worked out terribly well. North Korea hasn't sort of come around and behaved better, and so I think Lee Jae-myung's big challenge is to argue that if he does Sunshine Policy 4, it's going to somehow be different than the previous 3 rounds, which didn't really work terribly well. But that's probably at the top of the agenda because that's where the two parties split the most.
Yeah, that's interesting. And also in the timing as well, because we have seen some skirmishes on the DMZ with South Korean military having to fire across to North Korean soldiers at this point. Is there a message coming from Pyongyang?
Yeah, provocations along the military demarcation line, that's the formal name for the border that runs through the middle of the demilitarized zone. Provocations across the DMZ are actually quite common. They used to be actually quite severe during the Cold War. There would be genuine shootouts and people would get killed and stuff like that. Those things have calmed down for a while. The North Koreans, of course, don't really tell us why they do these things, so we always kind of have to project onto them. My sense is that North Korea believes in a kind of provocative or offensively oriented form of deterrence because North Korea is very far behind conventionally. It's got a big military, but it's pretty poor. The conventional military is pretty outdated. And so one of the ways the North Koreans tell us not to attack them is by constantly sort of probing the border. And my guess is that's what this is. But, again, the North Koreans don't tell us, so we don't really know.
Robert, in less than a month from now, we are holding general elections here in Australia as well. And Donald Trump and his trade war have been, at the forefront during campaigning. Is that the case with this election in Korea?
I think the likelihood of a South Korean retaliation and sort of like a big fallout from the trade war, I think that's unlikely. I mean, obviously it's in the news, right? I mean, if you go and turn on the news, it's a big deal. South Korea is a big exporter of the United States. The U.S. is South Korea's first export target. China is second. And so it's a big deal here, right? But South Korea also has a security relationship with the United States, including a nuclear guarantee. That's really important for South Korea. It helps backstop foreign investment and South Korea's economic growth. It keeps South Korea's defense budget from being really gigantic. And so I think there is a security unwillingness to risk the alliance with a trade war fight. And indeed, the acting president just said that today, that he was going to opt for negotiation rather than retaliation.
Okay, Professor Robert Kelly, always great to get your analysis on this program. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.